Harriet Parker stood by the side of the two-lane highway with her thumb extended and a small duffel bag slung across her shoulder. The mid-morning sun beat down on her silver hair, which fluttered in the breeze. She was 81 years old, and for the past 2 days she had been on the road, determined to trace the map of her own past. It wasn't the first time Harriet had taken off on a spontaneous trip. In her youth, she had explored the country with little more than a backpack and a smile on her face. But this time felt different. She wasn't embarking on a journey for new experiences. She was hitching rides to visit the places woven into her happiest memories. Perhaps she wanted one final glimpse, or maybe she hoped that in retracing her steps, she would pass along something precious to those she encountered. A battered pickup truck slowed and pulled over, stirring up gravel and dust. Harriet approached with a cheerful wave and peered at the driver, a man with kind eyes and a truck cabin that smelled like fresh hay. He offered her a seat, and they struck up an easy conversation. He introduced himself as Wade, a rancher headed west to deliver some equipment. It was a fitting start to her journey, Harriet thought. She had always admired the resilience of the land and the people who worked it. As the truck rumbled along, Harriet gazed out the window. Fields of wildflowers swept by, and she felt a silent kinship with their bright resilience. She listened as Wade spoke of his family, his children's future, and the sacrifices they were making to keep their ranch. Occasionally, he asked about her story, and Harriet offered tidbits. She spoke of her youth, of a small home in the Midwest, laughing parents, and a soulful kind of love she had found at a town dance. When Wade asked why she traveled alone at her age, Harriet simply said, "I suppose I want to see how the old places are doing, and maybe how I'm doing, too." She waved goodbye to the rancher outside a roadside diner, exchanging thanks and a heartfelt promise to keep in touch. The diner was squat and unassuming, a place Harriet remembered fondly. 60 years ago, she had stopped there with her late husband, James, on their way to his first teaching post. The memory of that day floated back to her like a warm breeze. She could still picture James in his threadbare coat, fumbling to come up with enough coins to pay for their coffee and cherry pie. Harriet remembered teasing him, her giggles echoing in the small booth under flickering fluorescent lights. She stepped inside to see that the vinyl seats were new and the lighting was warmer, but the lingering aroma of strong coffee reminded her of that sweet day. When Harriet ordered a slice of cherry pie, the waitress served it with a curious smile. Harriet shared a brief story about how, decades ago, that pie had fueled a young couple's hope. The waitress, who introduced herself as Misty, seemed moved. Harriet's eyes sparkled as she said, "Each place I visit is like meeting an old friend, and each new friend I make along the way is a blessing." After a night in a modest motel, Harriet headed onward, catching a ride from a young student named Claire, who was driving home from college for the summer. Claire had never picked up a hitchhiker before, but she admitted Harriet reminded her of her grandmother. Harriet felt a warm rush of affection at that. She and Claire chatted about life and dreams. Claire described her passion for music, her ideas for bringing art programs to underserved communities, and her tangled worries about the future. Harriet listened attentively, interjecting a story of her own when she sensed it might resonate. She recounted her time as a volunteer at a library, running reading sessions for children. "Your dreams matter," Harriet told her softly. "Even if they feel small or overshadowed, they hold power. They can touch people's lives in ways you might never expect." Claire looked grateful, as though she had been waiting for those words. By the time Harriet stepped out of the car, they hugged like old friends. Harriet watched the taillights recede and felt a twinge of wistfulness. Something about connecting with a younger generation filled her with fresh optimism. As the journey progressed, Harriet arrived in a tranquil small town she recognized from her early 20s. She had worked for a few heady summers at a florist shop there, selling bouquets of lilies and carnations. Some nights, she'd ride her bike around the lake, reveling in the scent of pine and feeling the youthful desire to conquer the world. She recognized the main street, though the shops had changed. Where the florist had once stood, a modern boutique displayed handmade pottery and artisanal soaps. The bell over the door chimed a bright note as Harriet stepped inside. A middle-aged woman with a gentle demeanor greeted her. Harriet's heart clenched with nostalgia for the sweet smell of roses and daffodils, but she remained composed, choosing instead to appreciate the artistry of the pottery designs. When Harriet spotted a small ceramic lily, she smiled. "I used to wrap fresh lilies and tie them with ribbons here," she said softly, tracing a fingertip along the ceramic petals. The shop owner, intrigued, asked Harriet if she would like to share a memory with the other customers browsing. Harriet hesitated at first, then agreed. She recounted how one August she had saved up to buy a single lily for herself each day as an act of self-care to remind herself she deserved beauty in her life even when she felt uncertain. The small group in the store listened quietly, touched by Harriet's earnest recollection. Before leaving, Harriet purchased that ceramic lily. She cradled it in her palm like a promise that every memory, every moment was worth treasuring. Her journey soon took her to an unassuming bus station near the outskirts of a larger city. The station was bustling with travelers from every direction. People hurried in and out, suitcases rattling across the tile floor. Harriet, unhurried, observed them. She remembered being a young mother, traveling with James and their newborn daughter, Leslie. She remembered the baby's cries echoing through the station, how passers-by alternated between sympathetic smiles and annoyed glances. Now, decades later, Harriet saw a young couple wrestling with a fussy infant. Their faces were etched in frustration and exhaustion. Harriet approached them gently, offering a few kind words and a warm grin. She cooed softly to the baby, who responded with a curious gurgle. With Harriet's help, they found a quiet corner where they could regroup. The young mother asked Harriet if she had children, and Harriet recounted her memories of Leslie, a bright, independent child who eventually moved to the Pacific Northwest to start her own family. The couple's relief was palpable, and Harriet gave them a soft squeeze on the shoulder as she rose to leave. She recalled James telling her once, "Sometimes just a little kindness is all it takes to keep the world upright." Harriet carried that belief in her pocket like a keepsake. Hitchhiking wasn't as common as it once was, and Harriet fielded more curious stares than in her youth. Nevertheless, she kept her spirits high and her smile ready. On a desert stretch of highway, a retired truck driver named Al offered her a ride in his RV. He wore a baseball cap and had a small gray terrier named Bud. Harriet's face lit up at the sight of the dog, and she softly scratched him between the ears. Al's RV was cluttered with souvenirs, postcards, magnets, and small figurines from all the states he'd visited. Harriet admired these mementos and compared them to her own intangible souvenirs, the recollections and bits of wisdom collected through a lifetime. Over a lunch of peanut butter sandwiches, Al confided that he was considering settling down near his son's family, but felt anxious that he wouldn't fit into their everyday routine. Harriet patted his hand. "We never stop being part of our family's story," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "When you show up, you fill a space only you can fill." Al's expression softened, and Harriet sensed her words had landed exactly where they needed to. It was dusk when they reached an old desert motel, and Al insisted Harriet take the passenger bed in his RV for the night. The motel's neon sign buzzed in the distance, casting pink light across the sandy pavement. Harriet declined politely, explaining she had a memory she wanted to honor by staying at the motel. Years ago, it had been a standing point of refuge during a storm. A younger Harriet and James had spent the night repair their rickety car. Their unexpected stay was made joyful by an elderly motel owner who played the accordion in the lobby, inviting them to waltz on the worn carpet. While the accordion might not be there anymore, Harriet wished to check if the lobby still held that flicker of friendliness. Inside, the decor was different, new wallpaper and a fresh coat of paint, but Harriet could almost hear the strains of the accordion and the faint hum of the air conditioner. She left the next morning with a heart full of memories, reaffirmed in her sense that people's generosity could transform fleeting mishaps into cherished stories. As Harriet continued west, she found herself close to the small coastal town where she and James had spent their honeymoon. She recalled how, in their younger days, they had saved every spare coin to afford a few nights by the sea. On the day they arrived, James dashed into the surf, fully clothed, encouraging Harriet to do the same. She had squealed in delight, salt water swirling around her ankles. Now, stepping onto that same beach, she saw the shoreline had shifted slightly over time. The boardwalk appeared newer, and modern shops lined the promenade. Yet the sound of waves rocking against the shore was unchanged, as comforting as a lullaby. She walked along the sand and found a piece of driftwood to sit on. She closed her eyes and listened, letting the cool breeze off the water tickle her cheek. A teenage girl wandered by, headphones draped around her neck. Noticing Harriet, she smiled and asked if she was okay. Harriet said she was better than okay. She was reveling in the memory of dancing with her husband on that very sand. The girl sat briefly, curious. Harriet spoke about how love can be a million small gestures, how each wave that laps at our feet can be a symbol of renewal. She left that beach feeling lighter, her spirit buoyed by recollection and by the gentle compassion of a stranger. Further up the coast, Harriet encountered a family road tripping in an old station wagon. They pulled over, the father rolling down his window to ask where she was headed. She named a city a few miles north, and the family insisted she hop in. And the mother, Linda, introduced their two children, Robbie and Brian, who bounced excitedly in the back seat at the novelty of picking up a hitchhiker. Harriet entertained the boys with stories of her travels riding in the back of a hay truck to a country fair, joining impromptu sing-alongs at a roadside diner, sneaking midnight stargazing sessions on deserted beaches. Their eyes grew wide, and Linda looked relieved to have some distraction for them. When Harriet asked about their journey, Linda revealed they were relocating for a new job opportunity and that finances were tight. She sounded hopeful yet nervous. Harriet reminded them how her family had once moved cross-country when she was a child, uncertain what the future held. In every corner of this country, she said, there's something worth discovering. Keep your minds open and let kindness be your compass. As Harriet stepped out, the two boys called out goodbyes. She waved with a full heart, sending them a silent wish that their new home would be full of joy. Eventually, Harriet arrived in a region dominated by towering redwood trees. She had visited once as a young adventurer, long before she met James. Back then, she was drawn to the forest's sense of ancient magic, feeling as though the trees whispered secrets meant only for those who dared to listen. Now she felt those same whispers, but they carried a different message. Perhaps they reminded her of the continuity of life, how generations come and go, yet nature endures. She strolled through the grove, dwarfed by the enormity of the trunks. Sunlight filtered through the high branches, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced on the forest floor. As she pressed her palm against the rough bark of one old giant, Harriet felt a trickle of awe. She was flooded with memories of youth, of a body once limber and full of uncontained energy. A park ranger approached, curious if she needed assistance. Harriet thanked him, but said she was simply pausing to reflect. The ranger paused too, intrigued by the serene look in her eyes. Harriet mentioned how comforting it was to know these trees had likely been here for centuries, silently witnessing generations of travelers. The ranger nodded. They never rush, he said quietly. Harriet whispered, "They don't have to," and the two exchanged a knowing smile before parting ways. One final stop beckoned Harriet, a quaint vineyard in the rolling hills of the West, once owned by a dear friend named Marianne. Long ago, Harriet had visited Marianne with her newborn daughter. James was away for military service at the time, and the vineyard had been a peaceful haven. Marianne had taught Harriet the art of wine tasting, how to savor flavor on the tongue, and how to appreciate quiet nature. Though Marianne had passed away years earlier, Harriet wanted to see what remained of her friend's legacy. When she arrived, she discovered the vineyard was now managed by Marianne's niece, Rachel. Upon learning Harriet's connection to her aunt, Rachel invited her in for a tasting. Harriet savored the earthy aroma of the old vines. She recounted the story of Marianne's fearless spirit, her determination to make good wine that she believed would bring people together. Rachel listened, tears glistening in her eyes. "It's not always easy keeping the vineyard profitable," she admitted, "but I can't let go. It's a piece of family history, of Aunt Marianne's soul." Harriet smiled encouragingly. "Perhaps the love you pour into it is the real legacy," she said. Rachel thanked her, offering Harriet a bottle to take home. Harriet hugged the bottle close, thinking it felt like hugging Marianne's memory itself. A few days later, Harriet reached the outskirts of the city where her daughter now lived. She had arranged no formal plan, no phone call to announce her arrival. Harriet preferred to make her entrance quietly, trusting destiny to lead her. The sun was low when she found Leslie's house, a modest bungalow with potted plants lining the porch steps. Harriet stood at the gate, heart pounding. She immediately recalled Leslie as a toddler running barefoot across the yard, head thrown back with laughter. Now, inside, Leslie had a life of her own, a husband, two children, a job as a nurse. Earlier in the trip, Harriet had wondered if she'd be intruding on a busy household, but she squeezed through the gate anyway, her duffel bag slung over her shoulder. She mustered her courage and knocked. Leslie opened the door, her eyes widening in delight and surprise. "Mom!" she exclaimed, throwing her arms around Harriet. In the living room, Harriet met her grandchildren, who marveled at their adventurous grandmother showing up at twilight, carrying stories in her heart and dust on her shoes. That evening, Harriet regaled them with tales of her journey. She described the rancher, the waitress, the college student, the family in the station wagon, the forest ranger. Each story carried a small truth, that kindness must be shared, that memories should be revisited and honored, that life's wonders reveal themselves when we open ourselves to them. Leslie's children were enthralled by their grandmother's quiet fearlessness. Harriet was reminded of how easily children can absorb the simplest yet deepest insights. As she completed her final story, Leslie placed a warm hand on her mother's shoulder. "I'm so glad you're here," she whispered. Harriet felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. For all the miles she had traversed, for all the memories she had relived, this moment, being with family, was precious beyond words. Warmth and gratitude enveloped Harriet, and she silently thanked the universe for guiding her steps back home. In the days that followed, Harriet settled comfortably into Leslie's guest room. She spent time teaching her grandchildren how to bake cookies from old family recipes, telling them about their grandfather's favorite fishing spots, and reminding them that life should be tasted slowly, like a rich piece of pie. At night, she would slip outside to the porch, a mug of tea in her hands, and reflect on the road she had traveled. She thought of the new friends she had made, the lessons they shared with her, and the imprint each place had left on her heart. She thought of James and how proud he would be to see her continuing to embrace adventure, living with kindness as her compass. As the moon rose over the quiet street, Harriet felt at peace. She was not simply chasing the past, she was weaving a bridge between then and now, leaving a shard of hope in every place she touched. Even as Harriet looked ahead, planning to stay a while with Leslie, she knew her journey wasn't over. Something inside her flickered insistently, fueled by curiosity and gratitude. She imagined a day when she might step out again, bag slung over her shoulder, thumb extended, waiting for another kind soul to stop and invite her into their story. She imagined giving away more fragments of wisdom gleaned from heartbreaks and triumphs, like dandelion seeds floating in the wind. She imagined continuing her tradition of returning to old haunts whenever her heart needed a reminder that even painful goodbyes can lead to joyful welcomes. For now, Harriet allowed herself to rest. She nestled into the warmth of her family's love, drawing strength from the knowledge that she had the power to inspire herself and others simply by living with an open heart. In that quiet resolve, Harriet realized she had never left her happiest memories behind. She had carried them close all along. She had traveled not just to see those places again, but to share their lingering glow with everyone she met. And it was that glow, she thought, that could guide us all home.